Yo, what's up everybody? It's David Brodeur AKA Brilly, and today I'm really excited because I'm going to show you this tutorial that I made that will bring us through hard surface modeling to texturing to lighting, the whole thing from beginning to end. Even if you're not modeling this exact object, it doesn't matter. I think you're still going to get a lot out of this tutorial because we're going to go through techniques that you're going to be able to problem solve and put towards anything that you're creating that's more geared to hard surface modeling. But then again, we're going to light and texture it all in Octane, and you can apply that to anything that you're creating. So let's just jump into it and go.
All right, so what we're going to be modeling is this retro PC mouse here. The awesome thing about this is I'm going to take you from modeling from nothing all the way to the final texturing and lighting, and we're going to get a really nice solid mouse here. The other bonus is that we're going to learn a lot of techniques with hard surface modeling, more hard surface modeling techniques for this specific object, but all the techniques here we're going to be able to apply to literally any object that you're trying to create that is also with hard surface modeling techniques. So this is going to be a really useful tutorial, whether you're making this specific mouse along with me or trying to make something else. There's going to be a lot of great learning moments in here. So the first thing we're going to do is just start off with a basic cube. Now this basic cube, let's just try to get some general proportions here of our mouse. So I'll try to get the kind of length and width here and dial this in a bit. I'm looking at this, I kind of feel like it's already pretty much there. And at any point I'm going to be able to come into this and make any like little specific adjustments after as well. So awesome, there's our cube. I'll hit C on the keyboard to make this editable. Now we're going to be working with our polygon, edge, and point modes. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my edge mode and I'll grab my loop selection tool. I'm just going to scale this in, kind of give this all a little bit of an angle. Now the back, based on my reference, has a little bit of an angle, not a whole lot. The sides seem to have a little bit more than the back. So if I just grab the x-axis here, I can scale that in a little bit as well. And now the front has the largest angle. So I can come in here, I can grab my move tool and just select this front edge and place an angle in there as well. Now the overall height seems to be a bit extreme on this still. So I'm going to bring this down. I'll go into my polygon mode. I'll select this individual face and I can just bring this whole thing down, and that's going to kind of make my angles a little bit more extreme, but I think it's a little bit more accurate now as well. Okay, so the next thing we want to take a look at is this bottom face. So it doesn't just come down to an angle and then this is like where the surface is on the table actually. So we'll grab this polygon face here because it comes down and then there's an additional edge to this that's kind of more at a 90-degree angle. And then there's another edge that I'm going to pull that down because there's like two separate pieces of plastic. And if I pull in my reference here, you can see that there's like this top half of the shell and this bottom half of the shell. And that's where when they're manufactured, they snap those two pieces together. And that way like the electronic stuff can be internalized inside of the mouse here and they can snap those together. So that's kind of what we're making. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is begin to add some bevels. So I'm going to just go into my edge mode. And I'm going to select all my edges here. And then I'll go into my loop selection. I'm going to deselect that middle loop. I don't need to add any bevel to this piece. So just really my corners and my edges here. And I'll go into my beveling. And let's just say apply. And let's change some of these settings here. Let's see what 8 looks like. Maybe we should go a little bit less. 8's pretty close. I wonder what 6 looks like. 6 feels pretty accurate. Now, obviously, you don't want to go so high to where, you're just rounding down. I guess it all depends on, what exactly you're making. For me, it seemed like 6 is probably pretty good, though, for the amount of rounding that we need. Let me turn on my garage shading and lines as well here, just so we can start taking a look at the overall segments. Now, the next thing that we're going to really want to do here is create that separation between the top and the bottom. So I'll go into my polygon mode and my loop selection tool, and we're going to want to create a loop selection here that is in between, that bottom half that we just looked at and the top half that we looked at. And so if I just use my scale tool, so T, And if I hold down Control or Command, you can see I can bring this face in or out. And I want to bring this face in. And, sometimes it's not like uniform. You can see here on the back, there's a lot more space than there is on the side. Not a ton more, but a little more. It's not perfectly uniform. So you can, if you need it to be uniform, you can go in there and grab something specific here. If you want to bring that back edge out a little bit, you can do that just by grabbing those individual handles. But now if we look at this, we are beginning already to get the majority of the shape of this mouse here, right? So if I kind of just move this off to the side a little bit, right, and I bring in my reference, you can see already that generally speaking, we're getting the shape here. And again, all this can easily change. If I'm looking at this and I'm like, you know what? I think some of this is not the right angle. I can change that. All right, the next thing let's do, let's get the loop path cut tool again, and let's start marking where we want these buttons to be. Now, the thing with putting some of these loop edges in here is that this is creating great edge flow. So you want these to wrap around. So it's like, I don't want to just grab the line cut tool, for example. I'm going to undo this. So if you're following along, don't do this part. You don't just want to come in here and create one edge and then model your buttons, because this creates open-ended points. And remember, our main goal is to create quads or tris. Quads being kind of the holy grail of the polygon that we're trying to create. But if we make some tris, we're not going to get hung up about that either. So let's grab that loop path cut tool again. And I'll come in here and I'll make a cut. So it seems like it's a little bit shorter, the button on the top side, and a little bit longer on this kind of like angled side here. Now we're going to grab our loop path cut tool again, and let's start getting the buttons added in. So the first one I'm going to do these kind of vertical cuts here. So we'll add a vertical cut in, and let's just maybe offset this by 10. Let's do another vertical cut in here and say 90. All right, so those are kind of our vertical cuts for the buttons. We'll add in another vertical cut for the middle of the buttons, and let's just split this into two. What I can also do is I can grab these two vertical cuts, and I mean, I'm really just working off of this one photo reference, but it looks like there's less of a gap and the buttons are a little bit wider here. After looking at this as well, I'm kind of feeling like the button is a little bit longer coming down on this angular face here. And this is one of my favorite things about modeling. It's like painting. Like, you can mess up while you're painting, paint the wrong color, have the wrong brush stroke. And yes, it's frustrating because it's like, it's a little extra work, but it's always able to fix it. It's just paint. It's like, just paint back over it. Same thing with modeling. If I don't like where this edge is anymore, I can just dissolve that. And I can create a new loop cut right in here and say, yeah, that's probably a little bit more accurate to the length that I want that button to be. So now let's go and grab our polygon mode and let's select our button faces. Now I'm going to do a little bit of an inset. So I'll use the inset tool, because these buttons are actually on the real mouse would be made of two separate objects, right? And that way they can click and move and stuff like that. For this, I don't need them to animate, so I'll model them all into one piece and kind of separate them with some selection tags, essentially. But I do want them to feel and look like they're separate objects. So what I'm going to do with this inset is I'll apply, and I have it really small at like 0.5. That seems to work pretty good. And then I'll grab my loop selection tool. I'll grab that inside edge that's separating the buttons from the mouse, and I want to pull these down. So I could just use my move tool again and hold down Control or Command and just simply move these down a little bit. I want to make sure I move it down enough, because when I go to bevel, not if, but when I go to bevel these edges here, I don't want it to intersect into the geometry. So that is feeling probably pretty good. The mouse looks like it's got some sharper edges on those faces, so I don't think there's going to be a whole lot more that we have to do there. Now let's go back in and select the faces of the mouse buttons again, and let's see if we can just control and drag this up. I think 0.5 is probably pretty good. Yeah, that looks to be about, roughly the height here. And let's go in edge mode and let's add some bevels in as well. I'll grab this edge as well, this loop edge here. I might be able to get away with not doing anything to this bottom edge here because we're not going to see it. I know that's probably not the best practice. If it starts messing up other areas of the model, then we do have to kind of go in there and make that adjustment. And I will want to select the corners as well. So make sure we go in there and select all the corners because they need to have a little bit of a bevel also. Let's select this corner and this corner. Okay, so there we go. All the corners should be selected. I didn't do that inside edge. Oh, you know what else? This edge here, now that we move that face up, we actually don't need that selection. So I do want to add that little piece in there. It's kind of, I probably should have dissolved that before because now I got to go in there and click each one of those. So I will do that. I'll select each one of those faces and not have to have that recorded. All I'm going to do is click all of them. There we go. I saved you from the boredom of having to watch that. So really all I went ahead and did was dissolve that additional loop edge that I had here. And now I've just got all my corners selected. I'm seeing if I can avoid putting any bevels and additional geometry here. Let's see how it holds up though. And again, we'll go to our beveling and say apply. Now, way too much here. Let's bring this down. Let's see what 2 looks like. 2 looks like maybe a bit too rounded as well. Let's try with 1. Yeah, 1 seems to be about right and accurate for the kind of amount of beveling that's happening on that. Maybe, you know what, maybe just a little bit more. Maybe 2 is more accurate. And again, I'm just kind of working along, maybe 1.5, just because really I'm just doing this by eye right now, looking at this and kind of determining what the angles and everything like that should be here. And now while I'm modeling this and while I have these faces selected, I may as well create some store selections here. So I'm going to grab my loop selection tool and let's just see. Now I definitely have some modeling issues, right? As we can see, if I'm trying to create quads and tries, this is not a quad or a try here, right? No 3 sides or 3 points. So I really should fix that. I'll select this kind of bottom loop here as well as this bottom loop there. And let's see, we could probably just do a fill selection at this point. So select, and then we'll go fill select. So we'll select everything in between those 2. Excellent. So here we go. Here is our buttons. So I can hit V on the keyboard, which will bring up my little interactive menu, and I can say store selection. And I can just say buttons. Perfect. All right, so there's the buttons to the mouse. Now, the other thing that we have in here is the little wire that comes out of the mouse. Now, this wire is starts off squared. We're probably not going to focus a whole lot on the wire right now, but at least we can model the port where the wire will come out from. So again, we're going to take a look at that loop path cut tool here. And you can see that the loop path cut tool is not really working correctly. Typically, if you notice that your loop path cut tool or one of your tools isn't working how you imagine it to be, most likely that's because you have some modeling issues. And look at that. I definitely do, because we have these beveling now that are creating open-ended points here, and that is kind of throwing off our geometry. And so, this is creating a quad, but now on this polygon, we have something that's got more than 4 sides and 4 points here. So it's kind of creating a weird n-gon, and then our loop path cut tool isn't really working all that properly. Now, what I could do to fix something like this is I actually could take these 2 paths and have this geometry just kind of wrap around and then connect back to itself. So I could kind of show you, just with this here, it's good to be able to know what to fix and how to fix it. So I could just basically connect this point and this point, this point and this point, right? And same thing with this point and this point, right? And so now I've made these all into quads. This is back into a quad here as well. And then basically the same thing I would have to do and wrap all the way around my geometry here, which is honestly not that big of a deal. I might need to figure out how to best construct it around this. So maybe I'll come straight down. I mean, I could finish it off into a try somewhere. I try to avoid doing that. And I'd much rather have this kind of loop all the way around our geometry if possible. So maybe I'll try doing that and just have this piece kind of come down here more or less. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. I think at a certain point, it might make sense to just straight up have this, go into a try. But just for the sake of this, it's like, hey, let's see what we can do for sticking to quads. It's always nice to be able to work in quads. Let's bring this across again, and we'll work up our geometry here. And if you're ever using the line cut tool and it's just like not functioning how you imagined, welcome to it, because that happens constantly when you're using the line cut tool. And sometimes you just need to change the angle that you're working at. It's very dependent on that a lot of the occasion. And we'll bring this up, and then we'll just kind of bring this back straight over, right? Bring it up here. And then this needs just to complete. And so basically, you just want to try to do this with this path as well. And then once you do that, we'll be all set. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So it's really just the same exact step. We just did this past time. And if you want to try to make this even, you can see how I got this line kind of nice and straight over here. Well, this one kind of like bends up and angles. There's also the slide tool, which you might want to take a look at. And the slide tool is really kind of basic as well. So it is the quick command. You got to go on the points for that. But then you can just simply come in here and you can slide a point. Oh, I'm still on my knife tool. Where is slide in the menu? Is this slide? No, that's mirror. Where's slide in here? I like finding it in the menu as well. I know where the quick command is, M, and then slide is O. It might not have selected because, oh, there it is down at the bottom here, because I was probably when I was in edge mode. But now you can basically just slide this point along an edge. So like you can't get it off that edge, so that is kind of cool as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. The slide tool is rather nice. All right, so there you go. So we've kind of cleaned that up also. And now we've got that nice edge loop. So I'm going to go and kind of convert all these into quads, and then we'll take a look at it here in just a moment. All right, so now as you can see, I've got those paths. So they're no longer open-ended points here. Now we never fixed this inside. This is actually a pretty easy fix. I mean, I can just kind of turn these into tries rather. So I can just bring each one of those and bring it right into a try, right? And so we may as well fix it since we're in here fixing stuff. No reason to come in here and not fix it. There'll be a lot of instances though, where when I'm working on something, if it's not creating any kind of visual issue when I'm modeling, I can try to get away with some of the stuff and hide it. But it's always best to obviously work and fix this stuff while you're working, because sometimes these issues that you're like, oh, that's not a big deal. When you go to like UV map or something like that, sometimes these create really funky things. Or if you need to throw your object into a subdivision surface, having open-ended points like this will give you some weird, wonky results as well. So it's really best habit to, just go in there and get your geometry correct and looking right. So we'll fix those and get all these turned into tries, and now we are kind of good to go. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any. I got that corner, and sometimes it's like, just a lot of repetitive steps in here, just making sure that you've got everything lined up. But now, awesome, everything's good to go. Now let's see if what I said is actually true, because remember our loop path cut tool was not working when I wanted to create like this hole here for the cord to come out of the mouse. And I said, well, probably because my geometry is broken up here. Let's see if that in fact fixes it now. So let's go and grab that loop path cut tool. And it almost fixes it. It's like, okay, well, now it does it across this whole face, but why not anywhere else? Well, look, we got to fix these as well. So the same thing that I did in the front, I never went and corrected it in the back side. So those will also have to be fixed. Pretty simple because it's just the same step that we did before. And sometimes that's what modeling is. And that's really a cool part, is because a lot of times modeling is just like, hey, you're just repeating the same steps over and over again. Depends on what you're modeling, but it doesn't get any harder. It's not like you have to learn a whole new technical set of things. It's just a little bit more time consuming. So I'll fix these now. So the nice thing is, actually we could save some steps here because our loop path cut tool is actually looping around exactly where we'd want these edges to go. So I can just create 3. It gets me almost exactly to where I need it. And then I can just use the line cut tool to complete the rest of these quads and have it close, right? Just like that. And it did it for us on the other end as well. So I can just come in here, connect each one of those. If you're wondering how I'm kind of ending this tether, I'm just hitting escape each time to kind of close out of that tether there. All right, let's go back in. Let's go back into our loop path cut tool, and let's see if this will actually loop around. It might not even like it because of these kind of additional segments here. So let's just take a look and see what it's going to do. Yeah, it's still not wanting to loop around. Oh well, though. We'll be able to close this off on our own. So let's just go down in here. This is kind of where the cord for the mouse comes out. It's pretty much centralized. Now we do want to fix this open-ended point that we have. And you know, I really have almost everything working in quads right now, but this could be an instance where I just break this out and give in here to a try at a certain point. So there's another tool called Stitch and Sew, which I use quite often. Stitch and Sew is great because you can basically just merge one point into another, right? And I can kind of just have that now taper out into a try right there. So I can do the same thing on this. So I can just stitch and sew those points right in there, and now we've kind of concluded that into a try. And now we'll take this polygon face right there, and we'll kind of manipulate that as well. Sometimes the angle, you can't just use object mode or world mode here to like get the face to kind of go in, so you might need to use the extrude tool, but this is working pretty good, you know, just to kind of have that face inset. Maybe I want to kind of like rotate it as well. That's fine. Maybe I want to kind of transform the scale also, so it's not kind of going up and it's kind of all locked in at some nice 90-degree angles or more or less. Then we'll want to do a loop selection again on this edge, and let's give this a little bevel as well. I may as well select all of these faces as well as the corners. Now we're not even going to really see this detail, but you know, depending on what it is that you're making, you might be seeing those details here. And let's give this a bevel also. So we'll hit this with a little transform. Let's go with 1. And then we also want to grab this separation between the top half and the bottom half. I thought I already did this. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I hit undo by accident. We grab those two here, and let's give this a bevel also. So we'll say new transform, and I think a radius of 1 is actually pretty accurate to that. So let's just turn off our garage shading and lines. Just go back to garage shading here. You can see our topology is pretty darn good. I am getting some kind of like triangulated, angular edges here. Let's see why that would be. Let's turn our garage shading and lines back on, and let's take a look. You know, why is it kind of coming and pinching on those two surfaces? I don't see any. Oh, well, that's because we just added that beveled edge in here, right? So we've gone ahead and complicated that a little bit by adding that. Well, you know, that's fine. That's not that big of a deal. We could undo that bevel and maybe try to do some beveling with our Octane material, which could be pretty cool. Let's do that. Let's undo this last bevel because we are going to be jumping into Octane, and we do want to talk about some powerful techniques we can do with just the material itself. What I am going to do though is I am going to throw this loop selection and bevel back in here because I did really like that. And then we'll kind of readdress this one here in a moment. That way we're not getting any funkier issues. We don't have to redo and get a whole nother set of quads in here. And we'll try to get that kind of edge here to be beveled via the material. All right, sweet. So here are my set of geometry. This is looking pretty darn good. All right, now let's start on the fun part of this because I feel like the model is basically done and complete. Like this is looking pretty darn good at this point. You know, if I move this model just like off to the side and we get it at this angle and I pull my reference in there, you can kind of see the model is pretty close, you know, just for kind of eyeballing it and making this here. So let's get into the fun of texturing. So I'm going to add in a plane here that this can sit on. Slide that down. Beautiful. And let's scale this up. Perfect. Well, I even like the angle that the shot is actually on. All right, so let's get Octane going. Let's get our live viewer going. Let's of course add an Octane camera in here. Let's go into the camera. I'm going to change my focal length. Let's go into 80 something, kind of like a beauty lens here. This is looking nice. Get this framed up where we want it. I'm going to add in an HDRI environment. I'm going to use the Grayscale Gorilla HDRI Link Plus here to work with this as well. And I'm just going to change the overall preview resolution here. And because we're not really seeing any reflections quite yet, but let's just get the render going. And just like that, you know, you can see kind of what a quality model is going to do for us, you know, just like instantly right out of the gate. You know, we've got something here that's looking fairly good, you know, with just some basic HDRI, nothing else at this point. So let's make some material. So I'm gonna make a material and I'm gonna make a glossy material. And let's add this material to our object. I'm not gonna worry too much about the, you know, the button color quite yet. Let's just get the base color overall, and then we can start kind of defining more and more of like the buttons and the color separation and stuff like that. So we'll open up our node editor, and I'm just going to add an RGB spectrum. Now let's just get the rough color, and I'm just going to basically be able to color pick the kind of reference image that I have here, and boom, just like that. You know, if I slide in this reference image, you can see how kind of close that we are to this. Like I see this angle being a little bit more extreme than what we have, but you know, hey, not too bad here. And again, we can always adjust this. All this can still be adjusted because it's just modeling. So let's slide this off to the side. And now we've got, you know, like this plastic material usually has like these tiny little bumps in it and noise and stuff like that. You know, I do have the GSG Plus account. So I'm fortunate enough that I've got this little Plus library that we could open up. And in here, they have some really great, if you go into the tech products, I believe they have some actually really good tech plastics and stuff like that here. Right, like the keyboard surface. I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones, right? Just these plastics in general. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these. You could just dive into it and just use those, which is pretty good, you know, and I highly recommend this if you do have the GSG Plus. You know, take advantage of this. I mean, they got their kind of speckled plastics already in here. I mean, I would go ahead and just grab one of these. Let's just add one into our scene, and let's just take a look if it's got any of these kind of attributes and qualities that we want. So let's open up the node editor here. Let's see what's in kind of the normal map. Classic products. So yeah, I mean, we could even like take what we've got and copy some of this stuff. And so let's see, there's some roughness, but it looks like they might be getting the bump out of like the normal map here. So let's just select this and let's add this into our own. And this is our kind of normal map, right? We can just drag and drop that right in. And let's zoom in on this for a moment just to see if like there's any kind of surface texture that is in fact going on here. Yeah, you can see it as kind of like the reflection comes up. that it's not just like perfectly smooth. There's this kind of nice bump. I love that, right? That's really kind of nice. That is what we're looking for out from this. So perfect. And I can always throw like a transform node into this, and we could get a little bit more control over it. So they're all kind of like collapsed and hidden right now. So we can just go pins and say show all. Let's see, if I double click on this, will it expand out? I really think just show all does it. Let's just try it again. Let's see, pins, show all. Okay, there you go. So you might just have to hit it once or twice here. But if you want that kind of pattern to be bigger, you know, we could also throw a transform node right in here and boop, link that right up. And if you want to try to get that texture to be larger or not, you can control that right here as well. So let's just close out of that. I'm happy with where that's at currently. We could also try, you know, if you have any other kind of textures that you want to throw in there to kind of get a pattern or some scratches or stuff like that, you know, definitely do that. I might even go back and grab this Grayscale Gorilla Plus library and just go into some of their textures and see what all, you know, we have to kind of work with here. You know, scratches might be pretty cool. You know, and we might want to restrict certain scratches to certain areas as well. So let's just grab one of these scratches, drag and drop it in. I'll just throw it right in as an image texture. And now before we get too far along, I really want to add some things in, like some dirt nodes. They can be really, really powerful, especially like separating certain areas of the geometry. And so if we were to just grab a simple dirt node here and drag and drop it in. Let's swap this out for the diffuse just so it's easier to see what the heck is going on. So if I grab this dirt node and let's just increase the strength a little bit, what you're probably going to start noticing is in kind of like the crevices and stuff like that. Let's just like increase the detail and the radius, right? And so when you do that, you can see in all the kind of little like corners and cracks, which could be cool because when we maybe want to add some like dirtiness or some where like, you know, the oils from your hands are kind of collecting, it's probably going to be in those areas. But let's try inverting that normal and let's just like mess a little bit again with the overall kind of detail. So now it's just kind of showing up on the edges for the most part, right? So I can kind of increase maybe the strength, decrease the overall like radius a little bit. You know, even if I get something like that, that's kind of cool. Now check this out, because what we can do is we can get a multiply node. I'll just type that in and drag and drop that in and plug this into the bump. And we can get our dirt node here, plug that in and plug our texture in. And what you'll see, hopefully, what we can do, let's just slide these down a little bit. And if we go back and invert this again, let's show this dirt node back on the diffuse, just so we're seeing it. Did I mess something up? Where did it go? Where's that dirt node at? Invert. Let's increase that strength just so it's extra strong here. And maybe I need it to be on the bottom beneath. Let's reverse that. Okay, yeah, it's working. I just need to make it a little bit more obvious here. So if I just like, let's just increase the strength significantly, and I'll start increasing the radius too. And what you're gonna start seeing, let's zoom in, you're gonna start seeing it kind of disappearing on the edges and being a lot more prominent in the center, all right? And we could do the opposite now. If we take that dirt node and we invert it, you know, we could, let's just, because it's hard to see what's happening in the dirt node when it's like this. So you might want to kind of invert some stuff here. And you can see where that is actually going to be controlled. I like the idea of having it something like that. So like, you know, maybe on the edges where there's a lot more friction over time, it becomes to get more smooth on the corners and hard edges and stuff like that. I think that's kind of a cool look. I don't know if this material is exactly the one we want, and maybe we want to kind of reduce the overall strength of that. You know, we could try swapping out with some different types of scratches. Let's take a look at some of these, you know, maybe even like the crust and smudges and stuff like that, you know, from like oils from hands and whatnot. We could throw those in there. Those Those actually look pretty cool, right? And see how they're not showing up on the corners, which would make sense because that's a highly touched area where the friction would kind of smooth that out and kind of gunk up everywhere else. I think this is pretty darn cool, actually. I might reduce the overall power. Let's say like half of that. Let's show that RGB spectrum back in on the color. You know, already we're getting a heck of a lot of detail out of this. Let's try 0.25. Something kind of like even softer might be more interesting. But again, all this control now is coming out from the actual dirt node itself. Really, really awesome. Just to be able to kind of swap that out. And so this might not be something you've done before, using a dirt node to just have a certain bump in a particular area. But now this is really looking cool. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is I can basically just copy and paste this Octane material, and I'll open this one up, and the RGB spectrum, I'll just color pick the kind of darker gray that's on the buttons, and I'll add, oh, let's swap these around here, and I'll add that to the cube, and in the selection for it, right on the material where it says selection, I'll drag and drop it where it says those buttons, and now we can get more specific coloring over those buttons. And now we haven't even gotten into, let's just pop out of here and back into our camera. Now what we haven't even gotten into is additional lighting. Now I am just using this kind of HDRI for the overall lighting, but let's also add some kind of texture to the plane here. So I'm going to add the just a basic glossy material to this. We can go in here and kind of make this something darker. This is actually kind of nice. I think if I start swapping out that HDRI, we might get kind of some odd reflections in here. I'm not 100% sure, but let's open up the node editor as well, and let's like add some additional detail. Let's go back into this plus library. And again, if you don't have this, I mean, there's tons of ways of even taking your own photos or using a lot of other, online assets to get textures, a lot of other free stuff as well if you don't have this. So don't get to this point and be like, oh, I can't keep up anymore. All these are image textures here. And maybe I'll grab just like some sort of scuffed surface. Some of these scratches could be interesting. And let's drop that into, the specular. Now this is a bit extreme, but again, we don't have to use it as extreme as this. Maybe I want to invert this as well. Maybe increase that, right? So we get some of that glossiness back. I don't know. Let's try, a couple other textures and texture options and possibilities. So if I were to grab, let's see something else. I mean, some of the dust could be cool, just really something simple and subtle might be better for this table surface. Let's try it. And this is really like the fun part of like modeling and creating, is like you now get to play with all this. But this is looking pretty cool. Maybe I'll take it from the specular and drop it into kind of the roughness here. Let's increase the overall roughness of it. And it's just kind of breaking this up. I do have it inverted right now too. Let's get some of that glossiness back. This is kind of cool. So that transform node in here, maybe the scale of this is a bit too large right now. But it does break up some of that uniformness that's happening in that, in just like a glossy reflective surface. But again, play around with different types in here and see what kind of results you get. Depending on how we swap that in or out. The dust is cool. Maybe smudges would be better though. We are working on kind of like a surface. Let's throw in some like coffee rings. That's cool. It's a bit, cliche looking to me. I like the idea of maybe some like hand or fingerprints as well. I think that looks pretty natural. I kind of like that. Maybe let's try a couple other hand or fingerprints and see what that ends up looking like. Let's drop this one in. It's got a lot of fingerprints. Yeah, it's a bit much. I like something where they're kind of covered up a little bit more. Let's see here. Let's try this set of hand and fingerprint smudges. that one's not that bad. That one's really not that bad. So yeah, dial this in. This is really where we can have lots of fun with the material creation. But let's now see what just some basic lighting can do for us in here. Let's go into some of our HDRIs. Let's open this up. And let's try some Pro Studios. Let's just click around here. Now, some of these might be too blown out. We can always adjust any of this. We can get different kind of color patterns and spectrums in here. I mean, this is getting pretty nice as well. But all of this, all these different lighting setups are going to drastically change the way your materials look. And so that's why anytime you're creating materials, you want to be doing lighting at the same time. You want to figure out what you want the mood of this piece to be, because as you can see, it is very, very different depending on what HDRI I'm using. I wonder if some like more location-based stuff will look better. Maybe something that feels more like an interior room rather than kind of like a studio lit kind of situation. So let's do that. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, that looks cool, inside this living room, fun room, right? Just like go around, like even this, like you see how we're getting this kind of nice little highlight off to the side. We're losing a lot of the surface texture of like the table, which I can get back from this. This is kind of looking pretty cool. Let's kind of move forward with this one right here. I think the surface of the table is a bit too extreme in that roughness. So maybe we're going to bring this down, the overall intensity of it, something like that's pretty cool. And you can give this more personality than just an HDRI. We could always come in here and create, add a little area light or something like that. Maybe we rotate this area light and bring it over here and move it off to the side. I'll move its position back a little bit more here in a moment. And maybe something that's got a little bit more of an angle would be better. Move it up and over. And let's dial back the overall intensity. Right now we're getting more of this like little highlight here off to the side edge as well. Maybe we add, maybe there's some warmth coming in. Maybe there's coolness. Maybe it's more from like a kind of an office space or something like that. That's that's going to be really a cool way of getting a lot more control too. Let's bring this down to like 12. I can copy this light and I can call this light warm. I can copy it and paste it and bring this light now over here off to the opposite side. And I might want to get a little bit of a top angle on this. Move it up and over. And then maybe on this light, I bring this light into kind of more of this cool spectrum, maybe drop down the overall intensity again. So let's see with that on and off. Yeah, it just adds a little bit extra to this as well. I'm really liking this overall. Might even dial this back down to maybe something like an 8. But just like that, now we can go into our camera imager. And again, this is like all the fun aspect. Maybe I increase the overall exposure. It's getting a little blown out in a couple areas. Let's enable some post-processing, add a little bloom in for some kind of like a little bit of haze in here. I like getting my gamma brought down just a touch as well, bring out a little bit more contrast. But something like this is really kind of feeling nice. If I wanted to come in here and mess around with how intense maybe this bump map is, maybe 0.2, maybe it's just like a little bit less. This is really something you can play with. You can even begin to kind of mess with the gamma overall, because that's going to have a big impact on the look, right? You can see this has got a lot more contrast in it now, where if I bring this gamma down, it's got less contrast, but we're seeing more overall kind of like grubbiness onto like the surface there. And that's it. Obviously we can just keep tweaking this over and over again. We can even bring up our HDRI intensity a little bit, bring some of that light in. But that's it. That's from beginning to end, you know, modeling something, learning some more hard surface modeling techniques, and kind of like making this our own, right? But, you know, from just an image reference model, you know, I would look at this and be like, yeah, I probably want to bring the overall height down. It's probably not that tall, but this is really, really kind of getting close to where we want to go.
All right, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. I'm going to have a lot more of these types of tutorials coming out soon.